Blood dripped from the executioner's blade, waiting for the king's final nod. She was nothing but a faceless rebel, a traitor condemned to die. But when the iron mask was ripped from her bruised face, the ruthless Alpha King froze. There, glowing against her skin, was his own soul's mark. Rain battered the ancient blood-stained stones of the Winterborn citadel, each heavy drop echoing like a ticking clock in the cavernous expanse of the great hall. King Darian Holloway sat rigid upon his carved obsidian high seat, his posture exuding a lethal, terrifying calm. To the lords and ladies of the pack gathered in the shadows of the room, he was a sovereign born of ice and wrath, an alpha whose reign was defined by strict, unyielding law. Today that law demanded blood. At the center of the hall, kneeling upon the cold, unforgiving flagstones, was the prisoner. She was a small, fragile-looking thing, weighed down by heavy, rusted iron chains that bound her wrists and ankles. Her garments were little more than tattered, mud-soaked rags, offering no defense against the biting draught that swept through the medieval fortress. But it was not her battered frame that drew the collective repulsed stares of the werewolf aristocracy. It was the brutal, heavy iron mask locked tightly around her head. The metal contrivance covered her entire face, leaving only a narrow slit for her eyes and small perforated holes for breath. It was the mask of a nameless traitor, a rogue accused of the highest treason against the crown. Lord Thomas Arrington, a senior council member whose ambition was as sharp as a hunting knife, paced before the dais. His voice boomed across the silent hall, dripping with self-righteous venom. "My king, the evidence is undeniable," Arrington declared, gesturing dramatically toward the kneeling figure. "This wretched creature was apprehended at the northern borders. She was caught smuggling silver-laced weaponry to the rogue factions gathering in the Crimson Valleys. Furthermore, intercepted missives bear her seal proof that she conspired to breach the Citadel's defenses and assassinate your royal person. She is a blight upon our lands, a poison that must be eradicated." Darian listened, his jaw locked in a tight, unforgiving line. The scent in the room was a chaotic blend of wet fur fear and the metallic tang of impending death. But strangely, he could not catch the scent of the prisoner. The iron mask had been treated with wolfsbane, an archaic method used to suppress the pheromones and spiritual energy of powerful rogues. It masked her identity and her soul, reducing her to a mere object of execution. "She has refused to speak." Darian's voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the chests of everyone present. It held no mercy, only the cold edge of justice. "Not a single word, sire," Arrington replied, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "She knows her guilt is absolute. The law demands the ultimate penalty. For conspiring to spill royal blood, her own must water the stones of Winterborn." Darian's golden eyes narrowed as he assessed the prisoner. She had not flinched, not once, even as the executioner, a hulking brute wielding a broad-bladed battle-axe, stepped up behind her. Her stillness unnerved him. Most rogues begged, wept, or screamed obscenities when faced with the Reaper. This woman merely knelt her spine straight, despite the crushing weight of her chains. Beside the king, Cedric Montrose, the Alpha's most trusted beta and long-time confidant, leaned in closer. "Darian." Cedric murmured, his tone cautious, meant only for the king's sensitive hearing. "The execution of a nameless prisoner is bad optics. The outer packs are already whispering that we condemn innocent Omegas to cover up the Council's border failures. Before you sever her head, let the court see her face. Let them know exactly who dies today." Darian considered his beta's words. Cedric was a strategist, and his counsel was rarely flawed. The Alpha King stood slowly, his imposing 6'4" frame towering over the assembly. The ambient chatter in the hall instantly died, replaced by a suffocating silence. He descended the 3 stone steps of the dais, his heavy leather boots echoing ominously. "Halt!" Darian commanded, as the executioner raised the heavy axe. The brute froze, instantly lowering the weapon. Darian stopped mere inches from the kneeling prisoner. Looking down, he caught a glimpse of her eyes through the narrow slit of the iron mask. They were a striking, piercing shade of violet, a color so rare it sent an inexplicable jolt through his chest. "Lord Arrington claims you are a master conspirator, a smuggler of silver and a harbinger of death." Darian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate register. "Yet you hide behind wolfsbane and iron. Remove the mask." Arrington stepped forward, panic flashing briefly in his eyes. "My king, I must protest. The mask is sealed to prevent her from utilizing any rogue witchcraft or venom. To remove it is to risk your safety. Do you imply I am too weak to defend myself against a chained, half-starved rogue? Thomas Ahor." Darian's gaze snapped to the Lord, glowing with a sudden predatory golden light. Arrington immediately averted his eyes, exposing his neck in submission. "No, Alpha, of course not." "Then unlock it." "Now," Darian ordered. A guard hurried forward, producing a heavy iron key from his belt. His hands trembled slightly under the Alpha's intense scrutiny as he fitted the key into the mechanism at the back of the prisoner's head. With a heavy clack, the rusted lock disengaged. The guard pulled the heavy metal apart, and the iron mask fell to the stone floor with a deafening clang. As the wolfsbane-laced metal was removed, a sudden, overpowering scent hit Darian like a physical blow. It was the scent of rain-washed pine, crushed lavender, and wild honey. It bypassed his logical mind and slammed directly into the primal center of his soul. His wolf, completely dormant moments before, suddenly roared to life, clawing frantically at the confines of his mind. "Mate." Genevieve Alden gasped, taking in her first full breath of untainted air in weeks. Her face was severely bruised, her cheekbone cut, and her lower lip split. Yet beneath the grime and trauma, her features were arresting. But Darian was not looking at her violet eyes or her defiant expression. His gaze was entirely locked onto the side of her neck. There, glowing with a faint, ethereal silver light against her pale skin, was a distinct mark. It was an intricate crescent moon, interwoven with a jagged wolf's claw. It was a sacred mate mark, a spiritual brand that only appeared when a wolf stood in the presence of their destined other half. Darian slowly reached up his trembling fingers, brushing against the collar of his own tunic, where an identical mark burned with sudden scorching heat over his heart. The ruthless Alpha King, the man who had condemned hundreds without a second thought, stood completely paralyzed. The woman he had just ordered executed was his destined mate. Chaos erupted in the mind of the Alpha King. For centuries, the legend of the sacred mate mark had been dismissed as old wives' tales, a romantic myth meant to pacify young pups. True mates were rare enough, but a sacred marked bond was considered divine, a union blessed by the moon goddess herself to bring unprecedented power to a pack. And yet here, it was undeniable and radiant, pulsing with a silver luminescence on the neck of a condemned traitor. The executioner, oblivious to the king's internal shattering, mistook Darian's silence for a final confirmation. The brute adjusted his grip on the massive axe muscles, bunching as he raised the blade high above Genevieve's exposed neck. "Stop!" Darian's roar shook the very foundations of the citadel. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated alpha command, laced with a terrifying desperation. He didn't just speak the word, he moved. In a blur of supernatural speed, Darian crossed the distance and backhanded the executioner. The massive man flew backward, crashing into a heavy oak table, the executioner's axe clattering harmlessly to the stone floor. The great hall erupted in a collective gasp. Lords and ladies scrambled back, eyes wide with shock and confusion. King Darian, the absolute enforcer of the law, had just physically assaulted his own executioner to save a rogue. Genevieve flinched instinctively, raising her chained wrists to shield her face, expecting the blow to land on her. When it didn't, she slowly opened her violet eyes, looking up at the towering Alpha. She saw the violent, protective golden glow in his eyes, but she also saw the deep confusion. She did not know what the mark on her neck meant. To her, the sudden burning sensation was just another form of torture the royals had devised. "Sire." Lord Arrington pushed through the murmuring crowd, his face flushed with indignation and poorly concealed panic. "What is the meaning of this? She is a convicted traitor. The execution must proceed." Darian spun around his chest, heaving. The scent of her pine, lavender, and honey was intoxicating, fighting a war against the scent of her blood and pain. "The execution is halted," he growled, his voice echoing with an unnatural rumbling duality, as his wolf fought for dominance. "This trial is suspended indefinitely." "Suspended!" Arrington shrieked, losing his composure. "My king, you cannot be serious. She was caught with silver meant to slaughter our children. She plotted your murder. To spare her is madness. It is an insult to the laws of Winterbourne." "Do not speak to me of the law, Thomas." Darian snarled, taking a threatening step toward the Lord. The sheer pressure of his alpha aura slammed into the room, forcing several weaker wolves to their knees. "I am the law, and I say she lives. Guards, remove her chains." The guards hesitated, glancing nervously between the furious Lord Arrington and their lethal king. Cedric Montrose stepped forward, smoothly intervening before Darian could slaughter his own men. "Do as the king commands," Cedric instructed sharply. He had seen the way Darian looked at the girl. He had seen the silver glow on her neck before it faded into a dark, tattooed scar. Cedric's sharp mind was already connecting the terrifying dots. As the guards cautiously unlocked the heavy iron cuffs, Genevieve rubbed her raw, bleeding wrists. She didn't cower. Despite the trembling of her exhausted muscles, she pushed herself up on shaky legs, refusing to kneel any longer. She looked Darian dead in the eye, her violet gaze burning with intense hatred. "Don't expect my gratitude, Your Majesty." Genevieve spat her voice, hoarse and raspy, from disuse, yet dripping with venom. "I'd rather take the axe than owe my life to a tyrant who reigns over a nest of vipers." A shocked murmur rippled through the nobility. Darian's jaw clenched. The urge to pull her into his arms, to heal her wounds, and hide her from the world was a physical ache, but her hatred struck him like a physical blow. "You will hold your tongue, prisoner," Darian warned, though his tone lacked its usual lethal bite. "Why?" Genevieve challenged, swaying slightly but standing her ground. "Because I speak the truth. Lord Arrington accuses me of smuggling silver, yet he forgets to mention who supplied the wagons. He accuses me of treason, yet he fails to mention that I was captured not at the border, but in the private cellars of his own estate." The hall went dead silent. All eyes snapped to Lord Arrington, whose face drained of colour. "She lies," Arrington sputtered, spit flying from his lips. "She is a desperate rogue trying to save her own neck. My king, you cannot listen to this madness." Darian's golden eyes shifted from Genevieve to Arrington, analyzing the sudden spike of acrid, sour fear radiating from the nobleman. The puzzle pieces began to shift in Darian's mind. A masked prisoner. Evidence found too perfectly. A rushed execution. Arrington's desperate insistence that the mask remain on. "Enough!" Darian commanded. Cedric, have Lord Arrington escorted to the holding cells. He will remain there until a full independent investigation into these claims is concluded. You cannot do this to me, Arrington roared as the royal guard seized his arms. I am a lord of the council. She has bewitched you. She is a demon. Darian ignored the screaming lord as he was dragged from the hall. He turned back to Genevieve. She was swaying dangerously now, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the brutal reality of her starvation and injuries. Before she could collapse onto the cold stone, Darian closed the distance, sweeping her up into his powerful arms. She felt impossibly light, frail as a bird, yet her spirit was made of forged steel. Genevieve weakly pounded her fists against his armored chest. "Let me go," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut as darkness encroached. "Don't touch me." "Rest now, little wolf," Darian murmured softly, the harsh Alpha King vanishing, replaced by a fiercely protective mate. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the remaining stunned courtiers. "The prisoner is now under my direct custody. Anyone who attempts to harm her will answer to me, personally." As Darian carried his destined mate out of the great hall and toward the heavily guarded royal wing, he knew the political foundation of Winterbourne had just cracked. He had saved her life today, but the true war for her survival, and for her heart, had only just begun. Shadows danced across the vaulted ceiling of the royal bedchamber, cast by a roaring fire that successfully fought back the damp chill of the Winterbourne citadel. Beneath a canopy of heavy velvet, Genevieve Alden bolted upright, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. The sudden movement pulled painfully at her bruised ribs and raw wrists, but the physical agony was instantly eclipsed by pure, unadulterated panic. She was no longer in the freezing, rat-infested dungeons. Instead, she found herself swathed in silk sheets, her wounds meticulously cleaned, stitched and bound with herbs that smelled of soothing chamomile and potent mending root. The sheer opulence of the room was a jarring contrast to the iron mask and the executioner's block she had faced only hours prior. Panic clawed at Genevieve's throat as she scrambled backward, pressing her spine against the carved wooden headboard. Her violet eyes darted around the cavernous room, searching for a weapon, an exit, or a threat. She found the latter seated in a high-backed leather chair near the hearth. King Darian Halloway sat in absolute silence, watching her with a gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight upon her skin. He had discarded his formal royal armor, wearing only a loose linen shirt that highlighted the heavily scarred, corded muscles of his chest and arms. The predatory aura that had suffocated the great hall was carefully restrained, tucked away behind a facade of cautious restraint. Yet the air between them hummed with an invisible electric tension, the undeniable pull of the sacred mate mark. "You are safe here." Darian spoke, his voice, a low rumbling baritone that inexplicably sent a shiver of warmth down her spine. He did not move closer, acutely aware of the terror radiating from her small frame. "No one will enter these chambers without my express command." "Why did you spare me?" Genevieve demanded, her voice still raspy, but laced with defiant steel. She clutched the silk sheets to her chest, her knuckles turning white. "You are the Alpha King. You execute first and ask questions never. Why did you stop the blade?" Darian closed his eyes for a brief moment, the muscles in his jaw clenching. He slowly stood, keeping his hands open and visible at his sides to show he meant no harm. As he took a slow, deliberate step toward the bed, he reached up and pulled the collar of his linen shirt aside. Over his heart, glowing with a faint, residual silver light, was the intricate crescent moon and jagged claw. Genevieve's breath hitched. Her hand instinctively flew to her own neck, tracing the outline of the matching brand that had burned so fiercely in the courtyard. "A sacred mate mark," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The old legends. They are real. But this is impossible. I am a rogue, a nobody. You are the sovereign of Winterborn. The moon goddess does not care for our political borders or our social hierarchies," Darian replied softly, stopping at the foot of the massive bed. "When the iron mask was removed, my wolf recognized your soul instantly. Had the blade fallen, I would have torn my own executioner limb from limb, and then I would have burned this entire citadel to the ground in my grief." Genevieve stared at him, the sincerity in his golden eyes terrifying her far more than his wrath ever could. "You expect me to swoon, to forget that your counsel tortured me for weeks. I am not a rogue smuggler. King Darian. I was a scribe, a ledger keeper in the outer provinces." She forced herself to meet his gaze, letting her anger override her fear. "I discovered a discrepancy in the silver trade routes. Massive shipments of weaponry were being funneled not to the rogues, but to a private militia funded by your own aristocracy. I brought my findings to a man. I trusted Nathaniel Royce, the provincial magistrate. It was a fatal mistake. Nathaniel sold me out to Lord Arrington. Arrington's men slaughtered my family, branded me a traitor, and locked me in that iron mask, so I could never speak the truth to you. Your court is entirely compromised." The temperature in the room plummeted as Darian's alpha aura spiked the absolute fury of a betrayed king bleeding into the air. The fire in the hearth flared violently. He had suspected Arrington of corruption, but the orchestrated slaughter of an innocent family to cover up a military coup was treason of the highest, most vile order. And they had almost manipulated him into executing his own destined mate to bury their sins. "Cedric!" Darian barked, not raising his voice, yet knowing his beta was stationed right outside the heavy oak doors. The doors swung open, immediately revealing Cedric Montrose. The beta stepped inside, his expression grim, holding a stack of blood-stained, leather-bound ledgers. "I heard my king," Cedric said, walking forward and placing the books on the desk. "And I took the liberty of raiding Lord Arrington's private estate while he was being escorted to the dungeons. Lady Genevieve speaks the absolute truth. We found these ledgers hidden beneath his floorboards, alongside correspondence with Nathaniel Royce. They have been purchasing silver and funding a mercenary army for the past 2 years. They plan to assassinate you during the upcoming Winter Solstice Festival." Darian's hands curled into fists, his claws extending, involuntarily, slicing into his own palms. He looked back at Genevieve, his heart aching at the bruised, battered state of the woman who had bravely tried to save his kingdom, only to be destroyed by it. "I swear to you, Genevieve." Darian vowed, his voice dropping to a lethal vibrating whisper that carried the full weight of a blood oath. "Everyone who laid a hand on you, everyone who conspired to silence you, they will drown in their own blood." The storm outside the citadel broke with apocalyptic fury, lightning fracturing the night sky and illuminating the gargoyles of Winterborn in harsh, jagged flashes. Inside the royal wing, a deadly silence had fallen. Darian had ordered the entire sector locked down, trusting only Cedric and a handful of his elite Alpha Guard to secure the perimeter. But corruption in Winterborn ran deeper than a single lord's ambition. Arrington's gold had bought many loyalties, and cornered rats were always the most dangerous. Genevieve sat up in bed, the healing herbs having worked rapidly on her werewolf physiology. The swelling on her face had receded, and the cuts were knitting together, though the deep sorrow in her violet eyes remained untouched. She watched Darian pace the room, a magnificent, terrifying beast confined to a cage of stone. The mate bond between them was a living, breathing entity, now a tether of spiritual energy that thrummed with every beat of their hearts. She could feel his protective rage, and surprisingly she found comfort in it. A sudden muffled thud echoed from the stone corridor outside, followed by the unmistakable wet sound of a blade biting through flesh. Darian stopped dead, his golden eyes flaring into full incandescence. His head snapped toward the heavy oak doors. "Assassins!" Darian growled, his body instantly shifting into a combative stance. Before he could reach the door, the heavy oak was blown off its iron hinges by a concussive blast of dark, explosive powder. Wood splintered and flew across the room like shrapnel. Through the thick, acrid smoke poured 6 men clad in dark leather armor, their faces concealed by masks. In their hands they held wicked, curved blades, glowing with the deadly bluish sheen of pure liquid silver, lethal to any wolf, even an alpha king. "Arrington's loyalists!" Darian roared, throwing himself forward to intercept the attackers before they could even look toward the bed. The royal chamber transformed into a slaughterhouse. Darian moved with supernatural speed, a blur of lethal precision. He dodged a silver blade aimed at his throat, grabbed the assassin's arm, and snapped it over his knee with a sickening crunch. He drove his claws into the chest of a second attacker, ripping through leather and bone. But there were too many, and they were armed with poison, meant to completely suppress his healing factor. One of the assassins slipped past Darian's perimeter, his eyes locking onto Genevieve. He raised a heavy silver crossbow, aiming directly at her chest. "For the true lords of Winterborn," the man hissed, pulling the trigger. Genevieve did not cower. The adrenaline of the ambush ignited the dormant primal power within her. The sacred mate mark on her neck suddenly flared with blinding radiant silver light. The bond activated, drawing raw strength directly from Darian's alpha soul and channeling it into her. In a fraction of a second, Genevieve threw herself off the bed, tumbling across the stone floor as the silver bolt embedded itself deep into the headboard where she had been sitting. Grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, Genevieve spun around. As the assassin drew a dagger to finish the job, she swung the iron bar with bone-shattering force, catching him completely off guard and sending him crashing into the stone wall unconscious. Darian, feeling the sudden surge of their combined power, let out a deafening roar that shook the glass panes of the windows. He dispatched the remaining 3 assassins in a flurry of brutal, uncompromising violence, his claws tearing through their silver-laced armor as if it were paper. When the final body hit the floor, Darian stood in the center of the ruined chamber chest, heaving his hands, coated in the blood of traitors. He turned frantically to find Genevieve. She was standing by the hearth, the iron poker still tightly gripped in her hand, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with his. The silver light of their matching marks slowly faded into a soft, warm glow. She had not needed saving. She had fought by his side. Darian crossed the room, pulling her into a desperate, crushing embrace. For the first time, Genevieve did not flinch away. She dropped the iron poker and buried her face into his chest, her hands wrapping around his waist. The scent of pine and wild honey mixed with the coppery tang of blood, sealing a bond forged in the fires of betrayal and survival. The following morning, the courtyard of Winterborn was once again packed with the nobility. But this time there was no iron mask. Genevieve stood upon the high dais beside King Darian, draped in royal velvet, the silver crescent and claw proudly displayed on her neck for all to see. Below them, Lord Arrington and the captured conspirators, including the treacherous Nathaniel Royce, knelt in heavy iron chains. "Yesterday I almost committed the greatest sin of my reign. Darian's voice boomed across the silent courtyard, his hand securely holding Genevieve's. Today the rot is cut out. Winterborn will be purged of its vipers. The executioner stepped forward, his axe gleaming in the morning sun. Genevieve watched without blinking as the true traitors met their end. She had entered this citadel as a masked, condemned prisoner. Today, she stood as the undeniable destined queen of Winterborn, an equal force to the Alpha King who would forever protect her. The brutal politics of Winterborn have been cleansed by blood and an undeniable mate bond. If you loved this epic tale of betrayal destiny and the ultimate royal vengeance, hit that like button to support the channel. Share this video with your friends who crave intense, dramatic werewolf romances. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling original fantasy stories. Your support helps us bring more wild, magical worlds to life.